Hello everybody, I'm John with JP Strategic Investments, and today I'm going to take a look at something really interesting that's going on with Tesla stock, and it's something that you'll probably want to take a look at if you're buying any options around earnings, or even if you're just in Tesla stock in general. So if we jump over to Tesla's chart here, I have a few things mapped out already. I got some wedges mapped out here, and I have some vertical lines kind of designating certain points in time here, and you'll notice that these wedges tend to have Tesla's earnings somewhere in the middle or a little towards the end of the wedge. So these red E's here are marking when Tesla has reported earnings. This one is when they were expected to report earnings. It hasn't been quite updated. So actually this blue line here that I've marked for this one is when they're actually going to report earnings. The other blue lines have lined up with when they reported in the past. And the yellow lines here, I've marked the ends or right about the end of the wedges. Now, the interesting thing here is that each time that Tesla has reported earnings in these past two wedges, they didn't really break through. They kind of got right to the top of the wedge here and came down. And then they continued for about 2 weeks or so to the end of the wedge, and then they just shot up. I mean, you're talking 20%, 30% over the course of a week or so. Now, I will say that there was a reason, a fundamental reason, you could say, that is pushing the stock up on these particular dates. So this last time we had, this was the announcement of the split, right, on August 11th after hours, so August 12th. Obviously, we have a pretty big run with the split, and then the split actually happens right here, and then a pretty big sell-off, and this is where this second wedge starts. This date here, this was when the S&P inclusion was announced, right? So obviously we have a decent run after that, and even after the inclusion, pretty much up until the next earnings here. So obviously, I'm admitting here we do have some fundamental things that are pushing the stock up towards the end of this wedge, or both of these wedges. But where it gets really interesting is if we look at these last two wedges. I'm going to kind of zoom in on these last two wedges here. And we start to look at the pattern within the wedge. It gets really, really weird. So if we go over here and we just map the path out here. At first we have the run up and we have the top of the wedge. Comes down and forms the bottom of the wedge. Comes up, not all the way to the top, and then comes back down and tests the bottom of the wedge again, and then comes right back up to about the same level here, right? Then it starts to go back down, but recovers, and this is where we have it test the top of the wedge. And then it comes down into earnings right around the midpoint there. Right? Now, what's interesting is we have almost the exact same pattern over here that is developing. We have it start at the top of the wedge, come down, start at the bottom of the wedge, then it comes up, not to the top, somewhere in the middle. Then we have it test the bottom again, and comes up to right about the same level here, starts to go down, but recovers and tests the top. And then we have it coming down into earnings here, right? So this is the exact same pattern. I mean, almost, okay, it's not the exact same pattern, but it's very, very close. We have it top of the wedge to the bottom, top of the wedge to the bottom, comes up, comes back down to test the bottom, and comes back up again right to the same level, right? Up, back to the bottom, same level. Then it starts to go down in both cases, but recovers and tests the top of the wedge. And then it comes right down to the middle of the wedge in this earnings, or coming into earnings. Now, obviously, this is technical analysis. This isn't a science. It's more of an art here. So, who knows exactly what the stock is going to do. You just have to acknowledge, though, it is really interesting, a little weird that we're seeing a very, very similar pattern going into earnings here. Now, one explanation that could potentially explain this is Tesla's obviously a highly anticipated, their earnings are highly anticipated, right? So heavily watched stock, obviously just included in the S&P 500. You have a lot of investors in the stock, and you have a lot of investors watching their earnings. And when we have heavily anticipated earnings, a lot of times you get an elevated IV, or implied volatility, in the options. For those of you that don't know about options, this might be a little over your head, but basically what this means is the options become more expensive around earnings. It makes sense because, stocks could make much larger moves around earnings, so it makes sense that the options would be a little bit more expensive. Now, the thing is that hedge funds, institutions, most of the time they're selling options, which means they don't really want the stock to make too big of a move. They want that option to expire worthless, and so if the stock doesn't really make any moves, then that's great for them. Now, what could be happening here is that, we look at earnings right here, right? We look at the earnings back here, and what you could say might be happening is could have a lot of hedge funds, a lot of institutions selling Tesla options right around earnings. And even if Tesla does report great earnings, which for the most part they have, at least in most people's perspective it has, but the stock doesn't really do much. It kind of just stays between these wedges, between these support and resistance lines. And then after about 2 weeks, at least in these last two ones here, these last two earnings reports, we've had these big spikes. Obviously, aside from this most recent one, again, we had a really big run up into the S&P inclusion and after the S&P inclusion, so some extenuating circumstances around there. But this pattern that is very similar is really hard to ignore. Me personally, what I'm doing here is I'm pretty much just going to sit and watch this one, see what happens. I do own Tesla stock, as most of you know that watch the channel. Probably just going to hold that through earnings. I'll take a look at the options and see what they're looking at, and if I do make any moves, I'll let you guys know in my Discord server. But for the most part, I'm going to sit back and watch. But I will tell you, if earnings comes up and we get a similar kind of just candle like this or like this, just sitting up here, right? And then it starts to kind of come back down and test the bottom. So basically, if we get, a similar pattern start to develop, like this coming down to the bottom, then it comes back to the top, starts to come back down, right? So if that were to happen over here, we kind of get it come up here, test the bottom, test the top, start to come back down, I'm going to be really tempted to buy calls right there. They probably won't be very expensive, and it's just hard to ignore how similar this pattern is to this pattern, especially if we get it continue something like this after earnings. So just something I've been looking at with the charts. For most of you that follow the channel, I tend to focus more on fundamental analysis, things like that, a little more long-term investing, over the course of several months and even up to a year or two. But this is something that I'd just been looking. I'll watch the charts every now and then for entry points and exit points. And I figured I'd just make a quick video on this because I thought it was really weird. Now, you guys can let me know in the comments if you think I'm just seeing things or what you think of this. I'm not a technical analysis expert. Like I said, I tend to focus more on the fundamentals, but I've done my fair share of charting and I tend to know pretty much what I'm doing here. But, let me know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys found this helpful, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Other than that, see you guys next time, and have a great day.